Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, we'll be reviewing the class supplement, the Golemist, designed by Eric Baumeister for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. The Golemist says it's a summoning-based class, but I think it might be more appropriate to actually call it just a pet-based class. This is an entirely new class for D&D, which I typically judge new classes pretty harshly and pretty strictly because we have so many classes now, and we have the subclass system, and I think a lot of classes a lot of times make better subclasses. Like, why do we need this whole other, archetype when it's just like a combination of these other classes or something? I think the Golemist actually makes a pretty good case for itself on why it needs to be a separate class, because I think the subclasses here also go even further in other crazy cool directions. It's similar maybe to an artificer in terms of it being a half caster, and it's intelligence based, and it's kind of based around something that's maybe pseudo-technological, although it doesn't necessarily have to be. And in fact, a lot of the subclasses, really only one of them is kind of embodies the like engineer style version of that. So by pet-based class, I don't know if anybody played, I'm sure some folks have played RPG video games and JRPGs. I was a big fan of EverQuest back about 20 some years ago, and really enjoyed. I think it was the magician in that game where you had like an elemental, little funny floating elemental with like fists and stuff, and they were all kind of, you could do an earth one or an air one, and you were considered a pet or the necromancer was another one where you had a little skeleton. And the idea was that creature would go up and tank and take all the aggro, and you would be the spellcast, the squishy spellcaster in the back, and a lot of your spells and abilities were buff based. So they would, just heal and take care of your person. You weren't necessarily the best team-based player. You were actually pretty good at soloing, which is probably why you don't see a lot of pet-based classes in a team-based setting like D&D necessarily. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily have to have one. And we've got druids and rangers, which all have different versions of having a pet. It's just usually not the main thing. The Golemist, that is absolutely your main feature. Right off at first level, you get the animate feature, which in this case, as a bonus action, you can summon your Golem. And Golem, I kind of misgivings about even calling it a Golem. I think the word Golem has just gotten so convoluted in fantasy settings, and then from its even origins, I think it can mean so many different things to so many people. You can mean anything from a like Frankenstein's monster, like the flesh golem is a thing in D&D, to you've already got things like animated armor. Is that considered like a golem thing? So nomenclature aside, the Golem, which is what we're calling it here, is basically just anything that you cobble together using a bonus action in any unoccupied space within 30 feet. So it could basically be whatever you want it to look like, which is kind of freeing and interesting. And it's something I believe that Tasha's did with the Ranger later on, where you could just have like Beast of the Sky, Beast of the Land, and really make it whatever you want versus having to choose a specific beast. This is kind of a similar thing where I think it's very freeing that you can really choose, a lot of the aesthetic stuff, as long as the mechanics are generally going to be the same. You can actually choose the size difference from at the very start, small, medium, or large, and you can choose what damage it deals as long as it's a conventional damage, so bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. You can see by the stat block here, it's got technically just a melee move and a ranged attack move with very generic stats for both of those, and the attack rolls, the damage, and the hit points all scale to your own proficiency bonus, your own attack spell modifiers, and your own hit points. The only thing that really doesn't scale to keep up with everybody else is the armor class, although I believe at least one of the subclasses you can enhance that. So everything looks pretty good and pretty well balanced, because I think that was a problem with D&D originally, and something Tasha's tried to fix was, trying to make these the pet classes work, because the problem is you want to make it so the the person who has the pet doesn't feel like it's useless because that's a big part of their class, but you also want to take care and not let that pet necessarily outshine another player character because shouldn't necessarily be equal to a player character. Somehow you have to make both the combination of the pet and the person in the back, that magician or whatever else, necromancer, make them equal one player character. And that's a very hard thing to balance. And, when I'm reviewing and commenting on these classes, I'm not playing these classes myself, so this is all kind of theory crafting on my end, but it looks on paper to be nicely balanced. I appreciate that it kind of uses that Tasha's model of and I also appreciate that it unlocks the ability to just make the golem whatever you really want it to, and it's aesthetically can look however you wish. I don't believe it says whether it actually acts on your own initiative or not. I'm assuming it has its own initiative. But otherwise, it acts as a completely loyal creature. And then you gain spellcasting also at first level. And if you look at the way the spellcasting lines up, you are a half caster. You only get up to 5th level spells, and even that's only at tier 4. So you're really closer to like a paladin or an artificer or a ranger when it comes to your own spellcasting. And you have your own spellcasting, which we're actually going to skip so you can kind of get a glance at that. Your own spellcasting list. There are no new spells added here, which is slightly disappointing, but also not something I necessarily need to expect. I've just come to expect that from a lot of these classes that add new classes or subclasses. Usually we get a few new cool, like, specific spells that go with it, but honestly, looking at this class list, I'm like, you know what? There's plenty of good spells by basically combining Wizard and Paladin into its own kind of unique set of spells. You've got plenty of buff spells you can use specifically on your pet. And of course, one of the early features you get is, in fact, you might get it right off the bat, I forget, is any spell that has a range of self you can cast on your pet if you wish. So, things like Armor of Agathis and really useful buff spells suddenly could be even more useful in that. You get a lot of the smites. Haste can be a big one that you could cast on your, construct. So you get a lot of, Fire Shield. I appreciate the spell list seems very much like it makes sense for someone with always with a good target to be able to buff and cast those kind of spells on. You can also use your Golem as a spell focus for the source of any spells that you cast. I believe with a range of like touch or something. So, which I think is similar to how like the familiars work and a few other pet-based classes as well. One unique feature you get it's already unique, I guess, that you can summon him. Oh, I should mention as a bonus action, you are limited to how you can only have, I believe, one golem to begin with. If you summon another one, it just creates a new golem. And then you can only summon them up to a number of times per day equal to your proficiency bonus. And they last for an hour. So that feels decently balanced. It's hard to say, obviously, playing over the whole context of a campaign. Maybe we'd have a better say about how, often, or maybe, oh man, I feel like I can't get my pet out often enough, or man, I always have my pet out. I don't know what I feel like you should want your thing out all the time. I kind of wish the duration was longer because it would have been nice to have it be not necessarily solely a combat thing. Because I feel like having it last only an hour, you're only going to have it out in either combat or in dungeon crawling situations. But later things do expand on that. So, but at second level, you get a pretty interesting feature where you can climb inside your golem like a mech suit, like a mech warrior type situation, which seems really interesting. It is balanced to where you have to use your action to get inside, and then it says you must use your action to use this ability and in the golem. If you do not, you exit the golem at the end of your turn. Which, took me a second to read that a couple times, but what I'm inferring from that is you have to spend your action to get inside the golem, and then every turn you have to spend your action to basically remain inside, and you have total cover, which means you literally cannot be targeted. But I imagine that would also very limit your own things. First of all, you spend your action every turn being inside the golem. Second of all, you have total cover, so you can't actually target anything outside. Now, I'm sure somebody would be able to tell me, maybe in the comments, like, okay, well, here's a specific like bonus action, thing you could still do while inside. I'm thinking clearly you could climb inside and then bonus action healing word yourself. It's just a spite, like an emergency situation is what I'm thinking it would mainly be for, is if you're like really in trouble, you're about to die, like, okay, I'm going to climb inside my mech suit. It didn't say you trigger attacks of opportunity thing. I just thought that was a really interesting feature, and maybe even used more for out of combat experience, because the golem's got a +2 to strength. So maybe it's like you need to cross, a gorge or something, and it needs to climb on the rocks, and I could climb inside my little mech golem and have it, go across so not even in combat situations, but I thought that was a pretty unique system, and you can also do the thing that familiar wizards with familiars can do, which is you can shut down your own senses and then peer outside of your golems if you want to use them to scout or something. Later abilities, obviously at 3rd level you get your subclass. I'll talk about that after, so we're going to skip ahead to 5th level, which is you never get multi-attack, but you do get a death burst, which means your golem, whenever it dies, which again is meant to be, I guess is meant to be like a summon, at the beginning of combat, or again if you're like going room to room in a dungeon. But they explode. What I appreciate here is there's 4 different ones you can choose at any time. You don't have to like select one and you're stuck to it. You just select one whenever you choose this feature when they explode. And I appreciate that only one of them actually does damage, so probably explodes the wrong word, but one of them is, explosive damage. The other one is knockback, which can be very helpful in certain terrain and situations. One of them grants temporary hit points to somebody, so like a healing surge when they explode. And another one is really interesting, the petrifying burst. The golem actually turns into like a solid object that can then has its own like AC and basically blocking material, and can be used for like a cover system or something. So I appreciate that all 4 of those are actually pretty interesting. The later levels, maybe not so much interesting. There's no real cool high quality feature that make me want to necessarily level up too far in this class. At 6th level, your golem's attacks count as magical. At 7th level, you can now create tiny and huge golems. That's actually pretty fun. I like that, but it doesn't actually change their stats at all. It's just the physicality, I guess. At 10th level, you can summon, so is that the one? You can cast a spell that only targets yourself. The spell can also affect any golem summoned by your animate feature, so you actually can twin spells with a range of self. So useful, but just not big, explosive, cool ones that add new abilities, I guess, similar to the Death Burst or the Another Form or Animate or abilities or anything like that. However, as much as I'm a little disappointed in the higher level abilities, the subclasses more than make up for it. These are really, really cool subclasses. This honestly makes this class one of the most well-realized classes I've seen. Again, I'm usually pretty harsh on the classes, but because this class already had a good feature going forward, which is, hey, it's a pet class. We don't really have that in D&D. It's like, well, we have druids and rangers, but okay, I see what you're going for. This is specifically just all about the pet. That's the whole theme. And then for the subclasses, we've got 4 available. One of them is about basically turning your pet into an elemental, not an elemental, but it has elemental features, because whenever you create your golem, it matters like what is there when you're creating them. And there's it's not actually a table, it's like a list of things where it's like if there's dirt, sand, or stone in an area, then you make an earth golem. If there's liquid, you make a water golem. If there's steam or smoke, you make a fog golem. Some of them get really crazy though. If there's sound, you can make a sonic golem. If there's emotion, you can make an emotion golem. Gravity, which is always gravity, you get to pick and choose. So obviously gravity, I guess, would always be available. However, notice how there's a level requirement too. So you start off with just kind of your basic elemental, and then you get a little bit crazier and crazier as you go until you get the time golem at 15th level. And each of these golems, it doesn't create a different stat block. It just gives them an extra ability. So like a water one can gain a swimming speed and gets like the amorphous ability where they can squeeze. Grass get advantage on grapple checks and different abilities like that. Emotion gain like some kind of limited charm ability. So it's not like a big complicated stat block. It's just an extra feature that they can have. Also, I believe this is one of the few... this is a subclass where you can make more than one golem. There we go. Oh, it's 6th level, so you have to wait till 6th level. But at 6th level, you're no longer restricted to having only one golem active using your animate feature. So you actually become a multi-pet class. So the other interesting thing is, like, in fact, the next one, Field of Robotics, and some of these are about having one pet that's super powerful and like adding more things to them, whereas this one is about having multiple pets, possibly of different kinds of styles and abilities, so you can manage multiple creatures all within one class. It, again, depends on which subclass you want to go with, could drastically change what kind of a pet class you want to be, which I find really exciting and interesting. So robotics is all about equipping your golem with weapons and armor, as well as and you give them special skill modules. You can even give them magic stuff, but you do have to follow attunement rules. They follow your own attunement limitations, and you give them any one of these 10 modules, which I don't think there's any limit on like unlocking them, but you can attach 2 modules at 3rd level, and you can attach more at higher levels. But they give you, different abilities like blind sight, dark vision, increasing their strength, adding kind of the rogue like bonus action dash or disengage, or maybe a stealth advantage. Just all kinds of different features you can give them to make your one golem that much more powerful and interesting. And you can always swap out these modules if you wanted to, just whenever you're making the golem. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. Then we get to the really crazy one, which is the cadaver subclass. And this one is your necromancer. So you can literally just, picture your, again, golem's a weird word to think of like a Frankenstein's monster, but that's kind of the catch-all term we're using. You're literally like harvesting them from living creatures. That's kind of the materials you're using. So in other words, they never really defined. The elemental obviously is now made from all those different pieces that I mentioned. That's what's cobbling together. The default one is just, whatever magic or objects in the air you're using to create them. And then in this case, the field of cadavers, you're supposedly using biological material to create your golems. This one has a crazy awesome ability though. At 3rd level, you can target a slain creature who has died in the last 24 hours and add one of those abilities from the creature to your golem. That is some like JRPG cool ass like monster class shit that I love. That is such a cool ability. It says you can be a passive ability or anything that requires an action, a bonus action, or a reaction, which opens up the playing field in a lot of fun ways. And then once you've gained that harvest, then you never have to gain that specific one again. And you can use that feature a number of times per day equal to your proficiency bonus. And then whenever you make your golem, whenever you summon them, you can literally equip them. Think about having your own little menu of harvest options. You need a whole nother like character sheet for this that you can then add, like a recipe book, and suddenly your creature might have these couple combinations. How fucking cool is that? Like that really makes it exciting to like fight different kinds of monsters and unlock those abilities. What's funny is thematically, I thought this one would be the least interesting one to me, is having this, the weird like fleshy necromancer type pet compared to the other ones, and yet mechanically this one is way the most exciting to me, like being able to add all these different creature abilities, and then later on you can add a creature's like damage resistances, movement speed, senses, skill proficiencies, their ability scores, or armor class. It essentially just doubles down on that one feature, but that one feature is so good and unlocks things like so crazy that I think that's really, really exciting and fun. And then the last one is, unfortunately, it is the least one, which is the field of shellcraft. This one, literally, it's a joke on the shell game, which is you're hiding, or the 3-card money, where you're trying to pick the card, or you're trying to pick the thing in the shell, and the person's scooping it around. In this case, the whole thing is you can just teleport between you and your golem, or you can have, I believe this is also one that lets you have multiple golems, and then you can swap between different golems as well. And the idea is, it's a shell game, like you don't know where we are, and that one, it's a little bit goofier mechanically and a little bit goofier thematically, but I could see the advantage of clearly being able to move around the battlefield that much. Could be very useful. And later on, you get the ability to swap your allies with the golems, or to swap enemies with your golem as well, which certainly could have some fun ways to use it, but just not nearly as interesting as the other 3. And then to round out, we get some pages on role-playing a Golemist, which includes just tables, which is fun. Origins, a D10 table, spiritual acquaintances, that you're interacting with different ghosts or spirits. I'm kind of lost on how that's involved with a Golemist specifically. I guess maybe they could be possessing your golems. And then just your favored material, which that one definitely makes sense. And then some DM's gameplay additions. These are magic items. We get 10 magic items that are all kind of thematically tied to golems, different maybe animated object type things. I love this flock in a smock, which is the, robe of many useful things, I think, where you can grab things and flick them off and they become different things. A nice little fun D100 table. for that. So I do like that addition for classes, is those magic items, and I have seen that before. Notice how we do not get any artwork though. It's a very, very plain, not sexy at all looking class. In fact, I didn't even get a cover page with this review copy. Thankfully there is one on the actual store page, but that is definitely a bit of a knock. And yet a professional design. You know, the layout looks good. It's well edited. And honestly, I really think this is an interesting class. I think this having such a dedicated pet class is something we don't really have in D&D. So I thought this actually does, you know, check that box of like, why does this class exist? And I think it does a good job of tying its theme together for, you know, giving me that ability right off the bat to summon my, you know, pet creature at level 1, and then, you know, have it scale with me and have abilities that just keep building on that, and then have the spell list, you know, support that. Just everything ties into this pet class feature, and then having really, really great subclasses that make things that much more interesting and really go above and beyond just, you know, I feel like the only one that was obvious to me was the Field of Robotics, which is like, hey, you know, modules and things you can install on your golems to make them, you know, more interesting, give more abilities. That one feels like the given one. The others all surprised me, and I thought were all really, really fun. Well, maybe Shellcraft to a lesser extent, but the other two I thought were really, really fun and interesting, and I was delighted to see them. All right, my pros and cons for the Golemist, which I kind of just already went over. Pros, it's a pet-based class based around summoning, enhancing, and modifying one or more animated constructs, which I think is a great thing to have for D&D. Pro, 4 cool and very different subclasses. I really appreciate the subclass design here, even if Shellcraft maybe isn't the most interesting one, but the other 3 are super, super cool and fun, and all feel like they would be worth pursuing. And pro, class origin tables and 10 Golemist-inspired magic items. I do appreciate when they add, I think this might have been something they added like in Xanathar's also, like later on. This wasn't necessarily the player's handbook, which is including these tables that give the player more ideas for generating their characters in specific to this class. So I like seeing those tables that are not, you know, mechanical based in any way, but just purely for role playing purposes. And of course, magic items to give the DM or really give the player like a hey, these would be, you know, some cool ideas for, you know, items that my kind of character would care about. Whether you want to use this exact one or just use this for ideas is certainly up to them. And then the only con is the lack of artwork, and I really feel like there's just no excuse for it now. You know, stock art exists. This is on the DM's Guild. Just throw it in there. You know, and I will say that class supplement is the least in need of art out of all the other kinds of things that I review. But you know, I would like to see some, like, throw some pictures of elementals and you know, the flesh golem, and just, you know, you can use a stock art in here, and that, you know, also isn't necessarily the best thing to do, but it's better than no art whatsoever. So it just kind of makes it look a little bit not as professional and topped off if it's no art whatsoever. And please, for the love of goodness, do a cover page because that also looks real bad in the final product. All right, final verdict. The Golemist is an effective pet-based class with 4 mechanically interesting and thematically satisfying subclasses. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel and support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, William, I'm Loud, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, David, Jam and Clams, Cora, Koa 1337, Jacob, Eric, and Kyle. And gold patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fazika, Tortoise, Scott, Humanoid Size, Sphincters, Stephanie, Rufus, and Carolyn. Thank you all very much for your support.